Hey there, fellow foodies. Welcome back. I have got a great episode for you this week. I am on the line with Sharon Palmer. Sharon, what will you be sharing with us?
I'm going to be talking a lot about how you can eat a more healthy plant-based diet to reduce your risks of chronic diseases, as well as how to eat a healthy diet at home, cooking easy plant-based meals, and some of my favorite tips and resources.
In her latest book. See you soon, foodies. Hello, fellow foodies, and welcome back. This is Dr. Cassandra Quave, and you are listening to Foodie Pharmacology, the science podcast for the food curious. We are again in season 7 of the show, and we have got so many amazing episodes coming your way. On the docket today, we have Sharon Palmer, who is our current guest. She is known as the plant-powered dietitian. Sharon has established an award-winning career in the field of plant-based nutrition and sustainability. She is widely recognized as a registered dietitian in the global community. She's a writer, editor, blogger, a speaker, professor, advisor, and media expert. She's written several hit books on around the topic of diet. Her most recent book, I was so excited to read, The Plant-Powered Plan to Beat Diabetes. She also serves as chief nutrition advisor for Today's Dietitian. She's adjunct faculty in the MS of Sustainable Food Systems program at Prescott College. She's also a nutritional consultant for several organizations, and she's co-founder of the nonprofit organization Food Plus Planet. Thanks so much, Sharon, for coming to the show. It's great to meet you.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, there's so many questions I have to ask, but let's start with the most simple one. Maybe I know that you write a lot about plant-based eating. What does that really mean? What is plant-based eating all about?
Yeah, I get questions about that because there's so many different ways of eating plant-based, and you're seeing that term more and more often, plant-based. Some people are really relating that to be vegan, and the health community is really focused more on just this diet that's really focused on plants and maybe not exclusively plant based. So I really see it as a spectrum of eating, so that a lot of people are interested in going completely plant based. So that would be a vegan diet. Some people are eating more like a vegetarian diet, which would allow for dairy and eggs. And then you have pescatarians who are vegetarians but eat a little bit of fish, all the way to something like a flexitarian diet, which is really increasing in the US. You're seeing more and more people who are trying to eat more plant-based, but not exclusively so. I think there is an interest in all of those different ranges and types of plant-based diets today.
That's great. And I've also heard it called plant forward as a diet of really trying to make sure you're getting lots of veggies. And when you think of this concept as a dietitian, we're not just talking about processed vegan products, right? We're talking about cooking with real whole fruits and vegetables and grains, pulses, etc. So maybe you can share with us a little bit about how you how can you take a plant forward diet and really address some of the challenges such as risk factors for development of type 2 diabetes. Like, how can our food be our medicine through our diet?
Yeah, we just have more and more knowledge today about how powerful our diets are in reducing the risk of chronic diseases such as diabetes, as you mentioned. We have known for about 30 years now that people who ate vegetarian and vegan diets had a significantly lower risk of getting type 2. But now the research is really zoning in on management. If you already have type 2, if you're in the pre-diabetes factor, that segment, or even type 1, that plant-based diets can help you manage it better. And that is kind of a more new finding that we're starting to see in the literature. And it's very exciting because in my career as a dietitian, at the beginning, it was all about, eating, really the quantity of carbs. We were carb counting for our patients and like measuring all of their foods. And now it's looking like it's the quality of the foods. It's really about putting more plant-based foods on the plate. So that it's a really exciting time for plant-based diets when it comes to chronic disease risk reduction.
Amazing. No, it's I think we can also taste the difference when you have more of a plant forward, plant heavy diet, or even not just vegan, but also vegetarian. I was recently back home. I grew up in a rural town where agriculture is still very big. And right now, as I'm sure you're aware, the price of eggs is through the roof in the country, and milk is also quite expensive. And um, I'm very fortunate when I'm home because there's a local kind of vegetable shop that supplies from local farms. And I got eggs from my cousin who has chickens at home. And I visited a local dairy to visit a friend and got some milk. So I had all of my ingredients coming from this very close, region around my home. And I know that you're also passionate about environment and how our food choices affect the planet. Maybe tell us a bit about how these two worlds intersect. Like, can we really think about food from the perspective of food for the health of our bodies, the nourishment of our bodies, but also food for the planet? How does that all come together in your work?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I think it's something that people are more interested in. Surveys are showing that consumers are actually thinking about whether a food is sustainable in the aisle before they put it in their shopping cart. And, we have more questions about how our food is raised and produced and grown. I'm very passionate about trying to connect with our agriculture that's around us, supporting our local farmers. And when we go through certain times, when we have certain conditions that are happening, whether it's like problems with our water supply and all these issues, food prices going up, it really highlights how important the local food structure is to have support that food system within your community and your region. So, one of the best ways that I recommend to get involved with your local food system is to really support those local farmers, shop at your farmer's market, grow some of your own food. Some of the most sustainable practices you could do is to use a little bit of land that you have available to you, whether it's a little piece of soil in your backyard or some pots on your doorstep, or supporting a community garden in your community to grow some of your own food so that you have that access. And it's really just an amazing thing that you can bring to your family, those skills. I mean, it's good for your mental health, so many things. But when we support these local food systems, we often find that we eat more fruits and vegetables. If you have a garden, research shows that people consume more fruits and vegetables. So I do think that's a really important part of being connected. And it's also part of that plant forward movement where we're really highlighting more seasonal produce, locally available produce if possible, to really increase that consumption. It's when we're purchasing it in season and local, it's usually more nutritious. It has a higher amount of nutrients because it's been picked at its mature, ripe state, and we're increasing that consumption.
Yeah, I mean, you can taste the difference too. I mean, that's the great thing about eating locals because it hasn't been shipped across the world in a container ship for, at sea. It's something coming right from your garden or from a farm just down the road. Um, that does have an impact on the shelf life and flavor of your products for sure. Now, in the writing of this book, on the plant powered diet to beat diabetes, what would you say are some of the greatest challenges that people face if they're either trying to prevent onset of diabetes, if you're at high risk, you're pre-diabetic, or if you have been diagnosed with diabetes? What are the biggest barriers in your mind for folks to have a better diet? Is it know-how? Is it access? I mean, what's happening there that makes things a bit difficult?
Yeah, that's such an important topic. Nutrition is so relevant when it
Mhm.
comes to, especially with prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. It's just, there's so much power in our lifestyle, exercise, and diet to help prevent that, or, to help manage it in a better way. So, there's so many factors. I mean, one of the things that we hear the most from people is that time is a huge barrier for them. So, when we're trying to work with people to see if we can include more whole, minimally processed plants in their diets, it's just that barrier of time. And there's this perception that cooking this way is going to take so much time. And then we have like all sorts of factors like access and affordability, which is an increasing issue. 13% of Americans are food insecure. They're not having enough access to healthy food to meet their needs. And I think that number can go up. We're seeing it rise. So that's a real issue too when people don't have access to foods in their communities. So that affordability piece is really important. So when I work with people, I like to really show them some accessible ways that I like to say that you can get a healthy plant-based dinner on the table in the time you could do like Uber Eats or DoorDash. By the time you actually put it on your phone and it comes, you could really have a very healthy, budget-friendly, delicious meal that could feed your whole family. So I'm always trying to provide those ideas and ways that people can access that.
That's amazing. Um, this is reminding me of a conversation I had with one of my sons. This is my 19-year-old, and he's kind of in those first phases of living a little bit more independently and is unfortunately going to, buying the processed food. I'm like, if I raised you better than I was trying to show him, this is fast food. I got, some pre-chopped cauliflower, carrots and broccoli that were bagged. And I like, look, fast food. I opened the bag, put it onto a cookie sheet, drizzled olive oil, salt and pepper, done. Like, that's fast food, buddy. See, it's healthy. You're getting these things in a deliciously, um, with delicious flavor that doesn't take a long time. So when you're working through recipes to trying to deal with this factor of time, are there certain tips or tricks or cooking modalities you find are easy for people to adapt to or easy for people to really implement and have, address that issue of the time factor?
Yeah. Well, one thing that I really love right now is the meal prep trend. And I'm a huge
Mm. Oh,
advocate of
yeah.
that. And if I can work with people and really find out which day is their lightest day, the day that they can like set themselves up for the week. I mean, for me, that's Sunday. I go to the farmer's market on Sunday. I like to cook for the whole week. And I can either put it in a large container in the refrigerator or put it into individual containers and grab and go. So that can really help people like line them up so that when that Wednesday comes and you just had a crazy day and the kids have sports and you're like coming home with no idea for dinner, you have some of those options available. And then also things like I think you were talking a little bit about like sheet pan meals, these easy ways that you can get a meal together. Literally, you can have all the elements of a balanced meal in a sheet pan. I like to just put a can of chickpeas with whatever vegetables I have cubed on the sheet pan, drizzle with a little olive oil, herbs, put it in the oven, and then maybe you might want to have some toast with it, some whole grain toast or some whole grain simmered grains, brown rice, something like that to serve on the side. And, you've got an easy solution. So finding some of these things that literally can take half an hour is what I'm always trying to work on and showing people how to do this. And, just making sure that you include those on your shopping list. Like I'm always going to have some canned chickpeas in my pantry because I know
Mhm.
I can get a healthy meal. I'm always going to have some brown rice or these things that you can turn to and make into a meal.
That's great. No, I'm the same way. I love to also incorporate other beans with black beans as well. Um, One of my favorite easy go-tos is I'm a big fan of the Instant Pot, pressure cooking. It's so simple if you'd like to make, a brown rice or wild rice blend. I'll often take my grain or sometimes I do farro. I've done all kinds of different grains in there. Barley, I mean, just really nice grains, and then you throw in a rinsed can of chickpeas or beans, a little bit of, some seasoning or herbs or spices, and you hit a button and you literally walk away. That's I mean,
Yeah.
it really doesn't have to be so complicated, I think, and there's this I think part of the challenge for many of us, and I don't know how many listeners identify with this, but when I was younger, I'm a Gen Xer, grew up in the 80s. When we had home economics in middle school, we were taught how to mix boxed foods or pre-canned foods together to make some gelatinous mess. It was, that was our education into cooking. And so I didn't really have a opportunity to learn how to cook until I was an adult. And then it was very much focused on ease of preparation, chicken nuggets or things that were already kind of that I had to just warm in the oven. And I think that many of us are missing that key education. And it can be intimidating because if you don't know how to chop a tomato, you don't know how to chop a tomato. So you have to start somewhere. Um, have you found in your work as a dietitian working with different clients that this is a common issue, that there's just a bit of lack of education on where to even begin in the kitchen on just general techniques?
Absolutely. We've lost home economics in the classroom. What you were describing
Mhm.
is gone. And a lot of kids are not learning to cook. And we're on our third generation of individuals who didn't learn how to cook because, if you're not able to pass that skill down to your children, then your child cannot pass that along to their children. So we're really seeing this lack of culinary skills, which is making a huge impact. I think it's very directly linked to, like our poor nutritional intake in the country. I mean, 9% of Americans meet their vegetable requirement, for example. So, that has a lot to do with it if you don't know how to do these simple culinary skills. So I always try to encourage families to find that. I used to volunteer and teach cooking classes in my community for children, and usually you can find some of these programs available, for children, but also learning those skills yourself, finding some simple ways that you can, you know, approach that cooking because it's just a pretty overwhelming fact that people that cook at home more often are more healthful. They eat a more nutritious diet. They eat less added sugars, added salts, added saturated fats. So just that simple change, could make a big difference.
Yeah. And I've learned, with my teenagers, one thing, and this is again not the most sustainable choice. So I say this with full recognition that this was not the best choice for planet, but we did subscribe for a while to a meal, one of those meal kit delivery systems where they
Mhm.
send you, your lineup of meals for the week and they have instruction cards. And we got to where I'd say, okay, teenager number one, you're gonna cook, today, this teenager two is gonna cook the next day. And we suffered through some truly horrific meals because they did not quite master the techniques initially, but then they learned. And I'm wondering if, what are some of your thoughts on how do we create more opportunities for our teens, for our tweens, for kids in the household to really start to gain some of these basic skills? Because I think you're right. Like our health is directly tied to what we eat. And if we don't know how to prepare healthful food, our health is going to suffer.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And there are a lot of things you can do to, foster that among your children. For example, uh, teaching them to cook, finding time from a very young age. When my kids were little, tiny, I put them on the counter and gave them a wooden spoon. It was a mess, but, you really start from there. You give them skills that are maybe you start with having them set the table and giving them some small tasks, but they're involved in that, meal preparation, and that also brings up the whole issue of family meals. But just the act of having family meals, regardless of what you eat, is linked with multiple benefits for kids, like, not only nutrition and health, but emotional, academic, and physical performance. So just this investment of a little bit of time, it doesn't have to be a lot of time, even half an hour. Just having them help and then progressing that, having them get involved, like in the shopping and I don't want to make it stressful for people and mini planning, but if it just helps to just jot a few notes down, that's what I like to do is like, okay, this is what I'm going to make this week. Just a few little notes. I'm organized and I actually have the ingredients. Um, a lot of people, that's the barrier. If they come home and they don't have anything that they can really think of how to put together a meal, that's what just immediately goes to the takeout. So having
Yeah.
a little bit of preparation and thinking of it as an investment, not, there are many cultures where the ability to prepare meals is a blessed, sacred
Yeah.
consideration. Like, I have enough food to nourish my family. It's just such an honor. And I know we're limited on time and we have all these barriers, but sometimes we approach food preparation as this huge hassle rather than like a blessing that we have this amazing resource of food to nourish our families.
I love that. It's about putting meaning behind it's an act of love for yourself, for your health, but act of love for your family. And I love that concept of family meals. I think you're right. It's not as common for folks to sit down as a family and eat a meal.
Mm.
My husband's from Italy, and so their family dinners get very large. With all the cousins when we were over there with the weekend dinners. It's just such a joyous occasion of people coming together and preparing food. And I remember as a child, like my favorite days of the month were something we called Fifth Sundays at church, where everyone brought a dish. It was a huge potluck, and you had all these different foods to try and celebrate and eat together and with each other. And um, I think that that is a great way to really just at home bringing your family together to enjoy that meal at the table and have that be time to discuss your day and hear what's happening in each other's lives. That's such a key part because nutrition is not just about, I guess, as you're saying, it's not just about the nutrition, the diet, the factors we're taking into our body, but it's the way we consume it and how that affects us overall. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important to establish that culture, that time. And I even like to think about cooking as meditation, and
Hmm.
because at the end of a really busy day, just that chopping can be so calming for me. It's like I can just take my mind up all the stress and chop, and then like
Yeah.
the aromas of food cooking and the spices, the colors. I find it very calming. But I think people just get very stressed out. There's so much content on beautiful food on social media, and people feel like, oh, if I'm not making this amazing, gorgeous
Oh,
thing, then I'm not going to measure up. But there's so much that you can do without even a recipe. Just like having these simple go-to things, whether it's pasta with whatever vegetables you have on hand and a can of beans, or like a stir fry again with whatever veggies you have on hand and a protein source. It doesn't have to be like some amazing, recipe that you have to get out.
yeah. Well, I think having the right tools can really help. But I'll one more pitch for another tool I use probably daily, and it is. I don't. I really enjoy using this tool, and I can't think about the name of it. But it's like a chopper where you stick the veg. There's a grid, and you push the veggies through it. So you cut them to the depth that you want them, and you can make little tiny squares or bigger squares. And I just love going through several zucchini or some tomatoes and just chop chop chop, and I'm done so quickly. And then it's into the pot or onto the pan. So easy and fun. For me, it's fun. Maybe I don't know if it is for everybody else, but do you have any favorite gadgets that you like to use when you're cooking or your kind of go-to daily thing that you use?
Yeah, I wonder if that's a mandolin, but the mandolin I have is for shaving things. It's like a little
Oh,
handheld device,
mhm.
but I'm not sure if that's what you're describing. But I
No,
love
mine's more
that
of like a
mandolin.
it's like a metal grid that's
Oh,
about this big, and you kind of
mhm.
shove the vegetables through it. It's very sharp, so you can cut yourself. So be careful when you
Oh.
wash it. But yeah, you can make French fries from it. You can make little cubes of vegetables, or you can make it's just a very
Yeah.
handy little chopping situation. So
Oh, that's
yeah,
cool.
yeah,
I'm all for finding appliances that make your life easy. There's no
yeah.
reason that you have to do it the hard way. So chopping is a huge barrier. People think that eating more plant-based means more chopping. So if
Hmm.
you can find ways, like for example, you can use frozen vegetables that are
Oh yeah.
pre-chopped. And people have this idea that frozen vegetables might be more processed, but they're actually just harvested when they're ripe and
Hmm.
put in, frozen, which can still have nutrition. So
Yeah,
that can literally mean no chopping, no peeling. Um, you can
absolutely.
find a lot of products that are chopped already. So finding these things, I like to use the Instant Pot as well. You mentioned the Instant Pot.
Yeah.
That's a really great way. Slow cookers, the
Mhm.
old-fashioned slow cooker, you can literally push the button, and when you get home, it's done. It doesn't burn, it's
Yeah.
just simmering very low. So things like stews and chilies, really hearty soups, casseroles, those work really well in those kinds of devices.
That's
I
great.
I also can't live without my food processor. I have a really old Cuisinart food processor, and when if you're really doing a lot of chopping, it will chop it more finely. But even like shredding, I like to make my own veggie burgers, for example, and I just put everything in the food processor, which it chops it super fine, and now in like 5 minutes it's done. So
Oh, that's nice. How do you make your veggie burgers? Do you use, beans in that as well, like black beans or chickpeas, or how do you make those?
I have a lot of veggie burger recipes. I have one in
Mhm.
in the book, and
Yes.
I have them on my site at SharonPalmer.com. I have a lot of recipes,
Mhm.
but my basic is I use canned beans. I have some that have black beans, white beans, chickpeas, and I usually feature like put oats in there because oats gives you that grain, some fiber, and it also helps things stick together. And then I usually chop some vegetables, whether it's zucchini or celery or carrots, herbs and spices, and then I like to use flax seeds, which not only gives it some extra protein, some healthy omega-3s, but it helps bind. And then I just shape them into patties and bake them. So when they stay together better, and it's a healthier preparation. It's easy, and they're so good that you can just freeze them ahead of time, and they're very economic, and they're just made with whole ingredients. So
That's amazing.
yeah.
Yeah, because that's one thing that does concern me is I think that a lot of our listeners are recognizing or already know of the importance of eating more plant forward, plant heavy diets. But I think that there's also a lot of risks out there when it comes to ultra processed health foods. I'm putting my hands up in quotations. If something's ultra processed, there are a lot of ultra processed, for example, vegan burgers out there in the market. And how do I define something as ultra processed? That's something that has, ingredient names that belong in a chemistry lab, something that you wouldn't know how to pronounce. They're not being bound through flaxseed or through oats. Instead, there are these other agents that are used for that. So I think yeah, anytime you can make these types of delicious, plant heavy or plant only dishes at home, that's always a win. Yeah. And a lot
Yeah, if
cheaper,
you
like you
can
said,
find
more affordable.
yeah, yeah, and when it comes to all of these, as you said, ultra processed foods in supermarkets, I get a lot of uh, feedback from consumers and people that I work with that they feel like they have to get all these in order to eat a more plant-based diet. Like people are associating that, and that's one reason why they think it's more expensive because they think, well, I have to buy all this, and it can be expensive to buy all of these things, expensive powders and things that you might see in the supermarket that are labeled plant-based. But I mean, research shows a plant-based diet can be cheaper because of the
Mhm.
protein. So beans are the least expensive protein source we have. So when you're
Yeah.
using more beans, you're going to save money. Even canned beans, if you're using more tofu, that's inexpensive, and that's a minimally processed. That's how I view tofu. It's a
Mm.
traditional cultural
Yes.
food made out of soybeans. So we have all of these things that we can turn to. You don't have to buy all of those. But on the other hand, if you do like, particular veggie burger that you're seeing in the store that could be processed, I mean, I think that's fine as long as it's not your just everyday diet.
Yeah.
I like to keep some in my freezer just to have on hand, but it's the beauty and the benefit of a plant-based diet is when we're eating more beans and lentils and edamame and grains and all those beautiful fruits and vegetables and the nuts and seeds and the spices and the herbs. That's really where we're getting the benefit.
Amazing. Now, with Food and Planet, you also are very involved in this concept of sustainability, which is another, really important for, especially also for planetary health. Um, but can you tell us a little bit about how our food choices impact the planet? Like, what does that really like? is my decision to buy produce from a local, like through a CSA, like, or work with a local farmer, or just frozen vegetables at the store, what is the impact of that choice on our planet?
Yeah, it's really significant. Our diets are so significant when it comes to, the planet. It's, like 70% of our water is going to feed our food, where, about a fourth of the greenhouse gas emissions are coming from food production, and that's the global. We're using, over half of the world's habitable land, to grow food for humans. So it's a big impact. And at the individual level, diet can be one of the biggest levers that we have for our own individual environmental footprint. I think people don't often know that things like, for example, eating a more plant-based diet, reducing your intake of, in particular, ruminants, which would be like beef and dairy, or sheep, lamb. Those animal proteins have the most significant impact when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, water use, land use, and then eating more, basically eating lower on that food chain can make a huge difference. There's three big things with our diets that have the biggest impact on the environment, and that the first one, as I mentioned, is that eating more plant-based. And then, of course, there are all these other things, as you mentioned, like eating more local, like, like all these, how even like how many trips, how far you drive to the grocery store, how much fossil fuel you're using. There's all these other things that fall under that. But just simply eating more plant-based is a huge factor. And then number 2 is food waste. It's very, very significant. About 40% of our food in the US is being wasted. So when you think of all of the impact it took to grow that food, and this is perfectly edible food. It's not like food that wasn't, human available for human consumption. And like the lion's share of that food waste is happening at our consumer level at restaurants, how much food, if you're throwing half your plate away, if you're letting food spoil at home, you're not saving your leftovers. That's the majority of where that food waste is happening. And then the third thing is our calorie intake. This is one thing you may not hear so often. And that's literally like when we're eating more calories than our bodies require, or we're eating low nutrient foods. So, for example, if your diet is really crowded with things like lots of sugary beverages, all of that impact to grow those ingredients to make those sugary beverages are taking up the impact in the food system, but yet it's doing nothing for our human health. So that shift of where our calories are coming from, are we, eating nutritious calories? Are we eating too many calories? That's a huge, it's like a form of food waste when you really think of it. So that gets less attention, but those are the three huge factors that are involved with our food system. I mean, there are many other things, just, we could talk for hours about all the different aspects of our food system on our planetary health. But those are big ones that we have in our control.
Well, such a good point. When I think about the challenges with waste at the consumer level, I think a couple of things come to mind. Number one is our portion sizes. You mentioned restaurants. I've had the fortune to travel to many different countries as part of my job, and the American portion size is literally enough to feed like 3 plate loads of of food in most other countries. And then I think also at home, if you even compare the size of our refrigerators to those of other countries, um, I remember, you know, for example, my relatives in my husband's family in Italy, like their refrigerators are probably a third of the size of our standard American fridge size. So how did we get how do we overcome this kind of cultural trend towards everything has to be big, big portions, big storage, big everything at home? Do you have any tips or know-how that you could share with us? And how do we help bring those portion sizes into a better, control that might also help us reduce the amount of waste that we're sending out each week?
Yeah, that's such a great point, and it's true that we have, I mean, there's research and science proving that we have larger portions. in
Mhm.
America, and you definitely see that. Um, Unfortunately, I've been involved with the restaurant industry, and they are really driven by what their consumers want, so if they reduce their portion sizes and then they hear kickback from their consumers, that's always a problem for them. But I am seeing a trend. There's a couple of culinary trends that I really love, like the small plate trend, where instead of getting a large entree, you're just getting small dishes and sharing it. And I feel like that can really reduce food waste because you don't have to over order. You don't order a huge giant meal for one person. And I am seeing more smaller restaurants that are serving smaller portion sizes. And I like to ask what the portion size is. It's like, okay, how big is that dish going to be? Is it like, show me with your hands, because I don't, I want to know. Of course, I always take leftovers home. And I think we have to keep doing that. There's nothing wrong, with bringing leftovers home. It's interesting because I was just in Taiwan on a nutrition retreat, and um, people would bring their own leftover containers with them. I thought that was such a cool tradition, like in a cute little cloth bag. Here's my leftover containers, and then I just loved that. I would love to see that happening more often in our country, but really taking those leftovers home and using them because people will take them home and they forget. And one of the things with our big refrigerators, as you point out, is that things get lost in the back and people will discover, "Oh, there's the strawberries, they're all moldy. They were back there, I didn't see them." But just doing a quick little inventory and, like, pulling out remembering when you buy produce is a very perishable thing. That's one of our big food waste areas because it spoils quickly. But using the more perishable things first when you're shopping, like, think about pulling things, pushing that, like, berries, salad greens expire quickly, those more delicate vegetables. The hardier ones are things like carrots, potatoes, sweet potatoes, onions. Those are gonna last. So, you can cabbages, cauliflower, broccoli has longer. So you can kind of push those back and use up the more perishable first. And if you really start noticing that, "Oh my gosh, I have all of these vegetables and they're gonna go bad," make a soup or freeze them, like, a lot of things you can quickly freeze so that you can pull it out and use later.
These are all great points. Wow. There's a lot to think about even in my own kitchen about how can I do better because we were definitely guilty of having those tomatoes or strawberries or grapes somewhere in the back of the fridge, like, "Oh, there they are," and they've gone bad. So I think that's really smart to think a bit more carefully. Maybe we should become a little bit more comfortable with having our refrigerators be a bit more empty, um, so that we can find things and going to the store more regularly, um, as needed. So it all takes balance, though, as we mentioned earlier, with our time constraints, with the pace of life today. That's the that's the other hurdle. But I do think you've given us some great tips and reassurances that you can cook a plant heavy or plant powered meal at home very quickly. You know, like you said before, you could even order delivery that actually arrive. You can have this amazing, delicious meal made at home. So thank you so much, Sharon, for coming on the show. It was really a lot of fun speaking with you.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Yeah. And where can we send folks to find your latest book and your other books? Where can we send them to find out more about your work?
So you can find all of that at sharonpalmer.com, or also the Plant Powered Dietitian will get you there too. But you'll find my books, and I have a pretty robust website. I post every day on whether it's a recipe or some nutrition information, wellness information, resources. You'll find a lot of free resources and tips there. So you can also
Amazing.
sign up for my newsletter. And I'm also on social media at Sharon Palmer RD.
Awesome. Great. Well, it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful book. Lots of gorgeous photos and beautiful recipes. I'm like ready to dig into some more of these. Really nice. So thanks so much, Sharon, for being on the show. And thanks to you, our listeners, for tuning in. I also want to thank our show producers, Rob Cohen and Christine Roth, for being on a great show. You can find this and all of our other episodes at foodiepharmacology.com. You can also head over to our Teach Ethnobotany YouTube channel, where we'll have the video version of this show and others. If you want to learn more about these topics, definitely head over to those sites. You can also find the podcast streaming on any of our major streamers. And if you really love this show, help us out and give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. That always helps get the word out to folks. So thanks so much for listening. Stay healthy out there, and I'll see you next time.